So I've been keeping an eye on the PC gaming handheld scene for quite a while now and picking up some of the different devices as I'm able to. And we've even talked about some of the different handhelds here on this channel. And recently one did catch my eye, mostly because of how different it is from the pool of handhelds in terms of its core component, and that is the MSI Claw. Well, MSI did reach out to me, asked if they could send one of these over to sponsor a video so I could take a look at it. My immediate reply was I'm probably going to open it up and take a look inside as well, and usually that's enough for companies to just keep moving along. But MSI said, sure, go ahead. You could take a look inside the device, and in fact, that's what we're going to do here today. We're going to go over some of my thoughts on it, and there was one thing that's come up many times in different comments and on social media, and that's the idea that these things are Windows-based, so you don't necessarily just have to use it for gaming. It is technically a general-purpose PC in the right conditions, so I figured, you know what, we'll try that out as well. Could this even be a PC replacement? Maybe in a pinch. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's start by taking a look around the claw itself. Right on the front, we have two offset Hall effect analog sticks with RGB lighting around them. These can be customized to your liking in the settings themselves, along with different effects. The face buttons here are Y, B, X, and A. Also have RGB lighting that you can alter and play around with. We have 4 physical buttons, 2 on either side of that 7-inch touchscreen display. There's View, Menu, which is Start, Quick Setting, and then the MSI Center M hotkey, which we'll talk more about that a little later on. On the left side, there is the D-pad that is mostly just like a glossy disc with the 4 arrows just sort of raised up. This, I found, works better in fighting games where you have to roll, as opposed to the typical cross design that might be better for platformers. You'll notice at the bottom there are 2 big speaker grills. These are actually in pretty good spots as your hands won't cover them up and they are projecting sound directly at you. On the top, we have our 2 bumpers, left and right, as well as 2 analog triggers, both of which also are Hall effect. We have a row of buttons and inputs at the top as well. We have the power button, which does double as your fingerprint reader. We have a little LED indicator light here for when it's on or charging, a micro SD slot, Thunderbolt 4 USB-C, audio jack, and then our physical volume button rocker. You also notice a large, almost like vent design here. This is something that MSI is doing with this device in particular, to where they're sort of trying to integrate the cooling look into the design itself. So while the entire top sort of has that rigid design, really it's just on the left and right where you have functional vents, but it tries to more or less blend it in to where you won't notice it. It's kind of the same on the back, which you'll see it looks like it's a bunch of vents all over the place, but only a section of that is being used when it comes to pulling air in. We also have 2 macro keys on the back, both M1 and M2. These are a little harder to press, and to me that's a good thing, because if you have your macro buttons set up in a specific way, you don't want to accidentally press them. These are ones that have a bit more resistance to it, so you do have to at least think about pressing them, and it's not something you're accidentally going to brush across and all of a sudden mess up what's going on in your game. You also have some pretty aggressive grips here, and this is probably the strongest part about this entire device is its form factor and its ergonomics. This is a very comfortable device to hold, even though it's heavier like a lot of these handhelds are. It actually fits in the hand really nicely. I do like the subtle red accent on the back here with that design, and with kind of the MSI dragon in the middle. I wouldn't have minded that to have some sort of color scheme to it. Maybe the dragon's all red on that matte black sort of shield. I'm actually surprised that back isn't just full RGB the way that these handhelds are going right now, and how PC gamers try to RGB everything at this point. Let's talk about the specifications of the device I have here today. We have the Intel Core Ultra 7 processor, the 155H. And what they've done here is they've sort of broken this up into a bunch of different cores. So we have 6 performance cores, 8 efficient cores, and 2 low power efficient cores. All of that working together for 22 threads and a max turbo frequency of 4.8 gigahertz. We do have 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 on board. Graphics side, we of course are using Intel Arc graphics. There is one NVMe M.2 2230 slot, which is currently populated by a 1 terabyte drive. It does have Intel Wi-Fi 7, which that one surprised me a bit. I mean, really in general, transfer speeds over the network, it's going to be very, very quick here, provided your network, of course, is able to support something like that. As for pricing, it's going to vary depending on the configuration that you choose. Currently, MSI has 3 different Claw setups on their website. These range from $700 to $800. However, I have noticed that there just seem to be sales going on for this handheld pretty consistently, whether it's MSI running a limited time offer, or I've seen places like Best Buy and others just have them marked down from time to time. So definitely shop around if you're looking for one of these. The front touchscreen is a 7-inch 1920 by 1080 display with a 120 hertz refresh rate. This is basically the same display that's in something like the ROG Ally, so if you're familiar with that, you'll feel right at home with this one. So let's talk about some of the games that I had a chance to play here. So I had this for about a week as I was doing testing and just trying it out, and in that week's time, I got multiple updates for drivers and just the system itself. So it does seem that MSI and Intel are constantly updating this thing based on feedback, and that is something that has come up. So what's happened recently, basically at the start of June, there was a new BIOS update that was pushed, and MSI has talked about how it has raised performance quite significantly. Unfortunately, I haven't necessarily had a chance, because I just got the handheld recently, to test it versus the old BIOS or old driver, since when you get one of these handhelds, the first thing you do, or just PC in general nowadays, is you spend a few hours just updating and downloading a bunch of stuff. So yeah, I just started updating this thing completely, so I was on the latest BIOS as well as the latest drivers across the board. I also set it up so that MSI Center M comes up as soon as this system turns on, and this is pretty much MSI's overlay so that you don't have to deal with Windows. Windows is still kind of lagging behind the advancements we're seeing in this space right now, and it is a rapidly growing space. So what you're seeing from these companies like an MSI is essentially a UI that will be there at startup so you can get to your games quickly. And for the most part, MSI has done a good job here, since they're clearly focusing on you picking a game and just getting into it. You're not jumping through a ton of hoops or anything when you start it up. All of your games are right there in a menu from left to right. You scroll through, you pick one, and hopefully it launches without having to launch something like an update or go into Steam or Epic Game Store, that sort of thing. It's still something you have to wrestle with Windows in general, or updates or things popping up as you're trying to start a game, and MSI is pretty much just trying to navigate it as best they can here. Along with your games, you do also have all the different gaming platforms and launchers at the top. You have your user scenario, control mode, quick settings editor, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and settings at the bottom. So it is just a very basic menu that allows you to navigate around and get to things quickly. With that said, let's fire up some games here, and I had, I'd say, a mixed bag of results. So one that really impressed me was Forza Motorsport. I jumped into this game really unsure as to what to expect. I kind of thought I would get maybe a solid 30 frames per second at like the lowest settings, but because Forza is so rich with its options and customization, I was able to maintain 60 FPS pretty easily throughout, and that was by way of a combination with, yes, lower settings, but also a dynamic resolution that will scale in order to meet a frame rate target that you set. So while I did have this basically at 720p, I'm sure it was playing around with the resolution depending on where the camera was sweeping or what was in the scene at the time. But because the screen coming in at 7 inches is able to kind of mask some of the deficiencies and the altering resolution, it really didn't have any issues when it came to the look of it as I was playing, and I would also say the smooth frame rate worked to mask a lot of it too. And of course, because we have analog triggers here, the full throttle response and push is correct, and it's actually a pretty good experience overall. Octopath Traveler 2 was another one that was really impressive, and this is a game that clearly would be able to take advantage of the 120 hertz display, and visually speaking, it is a really striking design, just this game in general, but it's also fairly easy to run, and on something like the MSI Claw, you will get over 100 frames without too much issue. Just keep in mind, when you push things that much, you will get a power draw that will work to lower your battery life. So what I ended up doing with Octopath Traveler was I was pretty content with 60 FPS. So I locked it there, and that allowed me to lower the overall profile for the power draw and got me a better battery life. Guilty Gear Strive was similar here in that with that D-pad and 60 FPS, it ran and looked great. Now on to a few games that were giving me some issues here, one being Halo Infinite. Now, if you play the campaign, that's where things kind of fall apart a bit. I would say with the multiplayer, because it's a bit more confined, I didn't really have these sorts of issues, but in the campaign itself, the frame rate was all over the place at times. As much as I attempted to sort of play around with the settings and lower some of the textures and resolution, it seemed to have this stuttering issue when the world was essentially drawing in and you were moving quickly. I also had an issue with GTA 5, which is kind of unfortunate because Grand Theft Auto 5, all things considered, is still an impressive game to play on the go, even though it's pretty old at this. It's more than a decade old. Just something about having GTA 5 on a handheld just feels next gen still. It's hard to explain. But either way, the game itself does start out and run at 60 frames per second, which is great, but then you start going around in the city, whether it's driving or even running, and there's this weird micro stutter that will happen every few seconds, and it ends up being incredibly noticeable as you're playing. Oh, and yeah, I did try out Starfield, of course. That's another one that does feel legitimately next gen on a handheld. And I was pretty surprised with the performance here, mostly because some of the other handhelds I've tried this on didn't do the best necessarily. This one, I was touching over 40 frames at times, but there was also this weird stuttering issue that would pop up, and the amount of power that was being pulled for this game to function at this frame rate was incredible. This is one that is going to chew through battery. MSI has claimed that you can get up to right about 2 hours of extreme performance for the most part, and I would say at some of the most stressful levels in terms of power draw, probably looking, for me anyway, about an hour and 40 minutes, but I was also turning brightness and audio up quite a bit, so maybe if you play around with that, you could get closer to that 2 hour mark. I think the biggest thing here is Intel and MSI just continuing to update based on feedback that they're getting, as they have claimed that they have roughly 150 or so games that are running smoothly at this time, and it seems to be growing in terms of that list. So here's hoping they can keep updating and continue to improve the performance and compatibility, because having competition in this space with multiple lanes from these different processor and GPU manufacturers, I think is what's inevitably going to get us to where games just expect us to be running on these low power chips. Okay, so now to something that people have brought up in the comments whenever we talk about these different gaming handhelds, specifically the Windows-based ones. See, while I may look at this as just a gaming handheld outright, there are some that look at this as just a mini PC, as in there is additional value if you're running Windows 11 on something like this, because you could use it for more productive things other than just playing Fortnite all the time on it. So in this case, we have a Thunderbolt 4 port at the top, and using just a standard USB-C hub with different attachments, we could turn this thing into, sure, just a little PC that you can plug into a set of monitors or even your TV. And while I'm sure some at home would be using it there just as a regular PC, I kind of look at this more as something I would use, say, if I'm traveling and I'm thinking of packing maybe one electronic, and we'll use the MSI Claw as the example here. So with that Thunderbolt 4 port and the USB-C hub plugged in, you could then plug it into a hotel room TV. And I'm envisioning one from a decade ago with the way it is if you go to a standard hotel. You're not exactly getting the nice 4K OLED TV. So in this case, I broke out the PlayStation TV. Figured it's probably from the same era as most of those LCDs you're going to find in a hotel. And yeah, why not? Let's use this. I mean, how many other channels are going to hook up one of these little handhelds to a PlayStation TV? So after running this USB-C hub to an HDMI cable and then connecting it to the TV, it came right up. No issues at all here at 1080p. And what I decided to do for input, I used a combination Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, a little trackpad on the side. This is something that you could realistically travel with in a bag. Maybe you have the handheld, some cables, headphones, and then a keyboard like this in a backpack. That's syncing up through Bluetooth. We don't have any additional cables running from the keyboard to that hub, so we can sit back maybe in a chair or on a couch or something, and yes, you would have a fully operational PC running Windows, which, as you can see here, being very business-like. We got the stocks up on the right side. There's a calculator somewhere in there, and We can open up WordPad, and then I have the baseball scores here. And yes, okay, so sure, you can use it for work. It can also work to render videos. It ran through Cinebench fine enough. And if you have image editing to do, photo editing, that also is functional here. I mean, it really is a decent enough PC. I would say kind of like mid-level, really, because you can also play games on here if, say, you sync up a Bluetooth controller, and that could be an Xbox controller, a PlayStation controller, for example, and you can load up, say, Tomb Raider. Or you can kick back and watch YouTube, of course. I loaded up just a standard, like, nature sweeping shots, and it was even able to run the video at 4K, downsampled, of course, for this 1080p display fairly smoothly. I almost wonder if there's plans in place for one of these handhelds to attempt to also come with a dock of some kind, or maybe be just more quote-unquote dockable, because here we have that one Thunderbolt 4 port on the top, and if you had a dock, you would technically put it in upside down, but I guess that would be fine, because if you just hid this thing sort of under a table or like around the back on a shelf and it runs to the TV and you have a wireless keyboard and mouse, you wouldn't really know much of a difference between that or a PC that's hooked up to it. I guess my one suggestion would be get a USB-C Thunderbolt hub that also has power delivery, because then it would charge this thing no problem and you wouldn't even have to worry about it running off the battery. And of course, we'll pop the back off to take a look inside the system. I mostly wanted to view it from the perspective of someone who's looking to repair or upgrade the Claw. Now on the back, we do have Phillips head screws around the top and bottom edges, along with this little warranty sticker guy here. I guess just anti-tamper so they know if you've opened it up or not. Once you remove the screws, a spudger around the edges was able to free the back plate, at which point we can see some of the internals with the battery at the bottom and the rest of the components at the top. The battery is sort of in this rectangle form, and it's pretty good in terms of balance. So it's not located too far on the right side or the left side, weighing it down on one end. The battery does come out easily. It's just screwed down, and then there's one plug running to it. So it's not glued to any sort of casing, which can cause issues if you've ever tried to remove one of those. Sometimes you can bend or break the battery or the components around it in order to remove it. In this case, just some Phillips head screws, and the entire thing lifts right out. So in terms of replacing the battery, it's actually not too bad. And when we look around here, we can also see our rumble motors on the right and the left. They run right up against where you would be holding the system, which means you're getting the full effect from any kind of haptic feedback. I noticed as I'm looking around, it's not obvious where your storage is, and that's a bit concerning, because I think one of the big factors for these types of handhelds is being able to get to specifically your NVMe storage and your battery. Those are the two things that to me would be most likely to fail. And after looking around, I did find it. It's behind the fan on this right side. And at first I thought maybe I could take just the fan out, but as I looked around more and more, it seemed to be essentially attached to that heatsink, to where you had to remove the entire heatsink to get to that storage, and that is very unfortunate. I think my biggest piece of advice here would be to not only move to a 2280 support for the NVMe, just giving more options for the end user, but also make it so it's just easier to get to. As soon as you take the back plate off, it's right there along with your battery, and that way you can have just better repairability for people out there who maybe either have a drive that fails, or maybe they want to step up to more storage internally. I will give MSI credit here when it comes to the cooling. So the biggest thing I've noticed, and it's not just me, as many other people commented on this system does not get very loud even when you're playing some fairly intense games. And looking at their cooling solution here that goes with the heat pipes and the fans, it makes a lot of sense. So looking at the way they've designed this, you can see two different heat pipes running to the left and the right here. So they have this dual fan setup, and it's pretty efficient in terms of how they are moving air through, where you can see the back plate has these openings and then it runs straight to the top there. So there's not a lot of distance for air to have to move to pull into the device and then exit out of the top. And then the way that they have these heat pipes and the surface attached to this Intel chip, heat is able to transfer and exhaust very, very quickly. Speaking of which, after cleaning off some of the thermal compound here, we can get a close-up look at our Intel chipset. I, of course, did replace this with some MX4, but again, I didn't really have any cooling issues as it was, even playing things like Starfield or Halo Infinite. I would say for MSI's first real attempt at a gaming PC handheld like this They've done a pretty good job from the engineering perspective of cooling this system without making it super loud, and really just rearranging and moving something like that NVMe drive so that it's easier to get to, while still keeping the battery being as modular as it is intact. I think setting them up very nicely for something that would accommodate a lot of end users and the desire to mod or have to repair the system. My final thoughts on the MSI Claw is it's a device that I am glad exists, mostly because I think there needs to be more competition in this space, not just from different manufacturers, but also from companies that create the chips that are going to power these devices. See, having Intel and AMD fighting it out in this space means that we would get better and better chips. More competition should give us better products. And here, with Intel still working to figure out things on software side for their Arc GPUs and technology, this is something that will continue to evolve over time, and that would include the MSI Claw. Just in the time I've had this device, as I mentioned, about a week or so, I have seen consistent updates coming through. So I would expect MSI and Intel to continue working for compatibility's sake with these different games. And it does appear that MSI is pretty committed to this space, as they have recently announced even more handhelds coming sometime in the future. And after seeing what they were able to do in terms of the engineering inside of this device from a hardware perspective, I'm actually pretty excited to see what else they have up their sleeve in the future. But let me know what you guys think about the MSI Claw, PC gaming handhelds in general, and the future with these different lanes of competition currently happening with AMD, Intel, and who knows what other companies could get involved. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.